The courage to begin again rebuilding is not about starting from zero, but about choosing courage over fear. Embracing imperfection growth begins when we allow ourselves to be messy, imperfect, and human. The power of vulnerability. True rebuilding requires the honesty to face what is broken without shame. Owning your story transformation starts with acknowledging the chapters we'd rather skip and still claiming them as part of who we are. Hope as a discipline. Rebuilding is less about instant success and more about steady faith in small, brave steps. There comes a moment in all of our lives when the weight of what we've carried, the cracks in the walls we've built, and the silence of our own doubts become impossible to ignore. And in that moment, we are faced with a choice, not an easy one, not a glamorous one, but a profoundly human one. Do we let the broken pieces define us, or do we pick them up slowly, tenderly, and begin to rebuild ourselves? Rebuilding doesn't mean erasing who you were, and it doesn't mean pretending the struggle never happened. It means daring to believe that even in the mess, even in the heartbreak, even in the failures and disappointments, there is still something worth shaping, still something worth saving, still something worth becoming. It's not about perfection, it's about permission. Permission to start small, permission to be seen in the process, permission to hold hope even when the ground beneath us still feels unsteady. And the truth is, rebuilding yourself is never a straight line. It is a dance between falling apart and rising again, between doubt and faith, between fear and courage. But every time you choose to rise, every single time, you are rewriting your story. You are proving that resilience is not about being unbreakable. It's about being willing to piece yourself back together with more wisdom, more compassion, and more courage than before. So today, as we step into this conversation, I invite you to see rebuilding not as a burden, but as an invitation to honor where you've been, to imagine what's possible, and to take one brave step toward becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be. There comes a moment in all of our lives when the weight of what we've carried, the cracks in the walls we've built, and the silence of our own doubts become impossible to ignore. It's rarely dramatic, though sometimes it can be, but more often it comes quietly, on the edge of a sleepless night, in the pause after another disappointment, or in the stillness when we realize that the way we've been living doesn't feel like it belongs to us anymore. And in that moment, we are faced with a choice. Not an easy one, not a glamorous one, but a profoundly human one. Do we let the broken pieces define us, or do we pick them up slowly, tenderly, and begin to rebuild ourselves? Rebuilding doesn't mean erasing who you were, and it doesn't mean pretending the struggle never happened. It means daring to believe that even in the mess, even in the heartbreak, even in the failures and disappointments, there is still something worth shaping, still something worth saving, still something worth becoming. To rebuild is not to dismiss the past. It's to look at it squarely and say, I am still here, and I will not be reduced to rubble by what tried to break me. Most of us are not taught how to rebuild. We're taught how to succeed, how to push forward, how to keep striving, but very few of us are given the language or the courage to begin again when life interrupts the script. Rebuilding yourself is not about getting back to who you used to be. It is about becoming someone new, someone wiser, braver, and more open-hearted because of what you've endured. And if we're honest, there is something terrifying about that, because rebuilding asks us to step into uncertainty, to put faith in a version of ourselves we haven't met yet, and to trust that we are capable of carrying ourselves forward even when the path isn't clear. What makes rebuilding so powerful is that it begins with imperfection. It begins with vulnerability. It begins with admitting that something is not working and that we no longer want to live inside the walls we've outgrown. For many of us, that admission feels like failure. But the truth is, it's the opposite. To stand in your own mess and declare, I will not give up on myself, is not weakness. It's the deepest kind of courage. And it's that courage that builds the foundation for everything else. When we talk about rebuilding, we often picture dramatic transformations, shiny before and after stories, triumphant endings tied up neatly with a bow. But rebuilding rarely looks like that. It is slow. It is quiet. It is sometimes painfully ordinary. It's getting up each morning and choosing not to give in to the old habits that once numbed you. It's reaching out when you want to withdraw. It's showing up with trembling hands and shaky voices because you've decided you will not let fear keep writing your story. It's 1,000 little choices, and sometimes those choices don't look like much. But over time, they add up. Over time, they become the scaffolding for a new life. Rebuilding also asks us to own our stories, the beautiful parts and the painful ones. Too often, we try to skip the chapters that hurt, the chapters where we fell short, the chapters that feel like they don't fit the narrative we want to present. But rebuilding is about wholeness, not perfection. It's about standing in your own story, even the messy parts, and saying, this too is mine, and I will not be ashamed of it. When we do that, we give ourselves the freedom to grow from the very places we once thought would undo us. There's something else about rebuilding that often gets overlooked. It's not a one-time event. It's a practice. Life will keep knocking us down in ways we don't expect, and each time we'll be asked again to decide whether we will stay in the rubble or rise from it. Hope becomes less of a feeling and more of a discipline, something we choose even when it doesn't feel natural. Some days, hope is loud and bold. Other days, it's a whisper we can barely hear. But even a whisper is enough to carry us forward. And so, rebuilding yourself is not about returning to what was. It is about discovering what could be. It's about honoring where you've been without being chained to it. It's about believing that no matter how many times life has shaken you, there is still more of you left to give, more of you left to discover, more of you left to become. So today, as we step into this conversation, I invite you to see rebuilding not as a burden, but as an invitation. An invitation to honor where you've been, to imagine what's possible, and to take one brave step toward becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, to believe that the cracks in your story are not signs of weakness, but places where the light can finally shine through. The courage to begin again is one of the hardest and most beautiful choices a person can ever make. It sounds simple, almost like a slogan we could put on a coffee mug or a poster, but when you really sit with it, you realize how heavy those words are. To begin again means you've had to face something ending, something breaking, something falling apart in your life. It means you've stood in the ashes of something you once believed in, something you once built, and had to ask yourself, do I stay here or do I rise up and try again? Most of us don't want to begin again. We want to keep moving forward in a straight line, building on what we already know, holding on to what already feels familiar, safe, predictable. But life doesn't always give us that luxury. Sometimes it strips away the very things we thought we couldn't live without. A job we worked so hard for, a relationship we invested our whole heart in, a dream that seemed certain but slipped away in silence. And in those moments, the idea of beginning again feels almost impossible. It feels unfair, exhausting, overwhelming. Because beginning again doesn't come with a guarantee. It doesn't promise that this time it will work out, or that this time we won't stumble, or that this time our hearts won't get bruised. And yet, there is something undeniably powerful about those words. Begin again. They carry within them the quiet whisper of resilience. They remind us that even when everything else has been taken away, the choice to rise, the choice to try, the choice to start anew is still ours. Courage is not about being fearless. Courage is about moving forward, even while fear still has its grip on us. It's about hearing the voice that says, what if you fail? And answering with, what if I don't? I think sometimes we underestimate just how much bravery it takes to start fresh. Because starting fresh doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like the smallest of steps, waking up after heartbreak and deciding to shower, to dress, to step outside again, sitting at a desk with a blank page and choosing to write that first awkward sentence, walking into a new room, a new city, a new season of life without knowing how people will see you, but showing up anyway. These little choices might look ordinary to the outside world, but for the person making them, they are monumental. They are acts of defiance against despair. The courage to begin again isn't about pretending that nothing ever hurt you. It isn't about erasing the story that came before. It's about carrying that story with you and choosing to believe that it doesn't have to be the final chapter. Beginning again is less about wiping the slate clean and more about writing the next line with a shaky but determined hand. It's admitting that even though you've been bruised, you are not broken beyond repair. Even though you've been disappointed, you are not done. And there's something else. Beginning again doesn't just change our own lives. It changes the lives of the people watching us too. When we dare to start over, when we choose courage over comfort, we become living proof that it's possible. We show others that failure isn't the end, that heartbreak doesn't have to be permanent, that dreams can be rebuilt even after they've been shattered. In a world that often tells us to stay in line, to stay small, to stay quiet, beginning again is an act of rebellion. It is saying, I will not let fear or loss or shame dictate the rest of my story. And yet, let's be honest, beginning again is messy. It's not a neat, polished process. It's filled with second guessing, with moments of exhaustion, with voices both inside and outside telling us it would be easier not to try. But the truth is, the mess is part of it. The mess is proof that we are in motion, that we are alive, that we are still willing to step forward, even when the ground beneath us feels uncertain. Courage doesn't show up in the absence of doubt. Courage shows up right alongside doubt, walking hand in hand with it, saying, we're going anyway. Every time you begin again, you teach yourself something about your own resilience. You realize that the endings you thought would undo you didn't. You realize that the storms you thought would drown you didn't. And with each new beginning, you gather evidence that you are stronger, more capable, more alive than you once believed. That's what makes courage so transformative. It doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes the way you see yourself. So maybe the question isn't, do I have the courage to begin again? Maybe the better question is, what might become possible if I do? Because when you summon that courage, when you take that first shaky step, you open the door to things you can't yet see. You open the door to unexpected friendships, new opportunities, deeper love, surprising joy. You open the door to becoming the kind of person who not only survives but grows, who not only rebuilds but thrives, who not only starts again but learns how to rise stronger every single time. Embracing imperfection is one of the most difficult lessons we will ever have to learn because everything around us tells us to do the opposite. From the time we are young, we are fed the story that if we just work harder, if we polish ourselves more, if we eliminate the cracks and hide the scars, then we will finally be worthy. We are taught to strive for flawless grades, flawless bodies, flawless homes, flawless lives. And what happens? We exhaust ourselves chasing a version of perfection that doesn't even exist. And in the process, we forget that the very things we are trying to cover up are the very things that make us human. To embrace imperfection is to say, I will stop pretending to be who I think the world wants me to be, and I will start showing up as who I actually am. That doesn't mean we stop growing, and it doesn't mean we stop trying to be better. It means we stop expecting ourselves to be without flaws, and instead we begin to see those flaws as part of the story, part of the texture, part of the truth. The truth is, imperfection is not the enemy of growth. It is the soil that growth comes from. Think about it. A seed doesn't sprout in polished marble. It breaks open in messy, uneven dirt. Flowers bloom in soil that is cracked and rough and filled with things that don't look perfect to the eye. Our lives are no different. If we wait until everything is perfectly aligned, if we wait until we have no fears, no mistakes, no insecurities, we will wait forever. Embracing imperfection means beginning now with what we have, with who we are, with the cracks and the gaps still showing. One of the hardest parts of this is the fear of being seen, because the moment we stop polishing ourselves to perfection, the moment we show the raw and the real, we risk exposure, we risk judgment, we risk rejection, and that fear is real. But what is even more painful is the loneliness of hiding. Because when we spend our lives presenting a mask of perfection, people may admire us, but they cannot truly love us. They can't love the parts of us they never get to see. And so we build relationships on appearances, careers on image, lives on a kind of fragile glass that cracks the moment anything goes wrong. To embrace imperfection is to risk vulnerability, but it is also the only way to be deeply known and deeply loved. Imperfection is also where connection lives. Have you ever noticed how we don't bond over each other's polished surfaces? We bond over the moments when someone admits they're afraid, or when they confess they've messed up, or when they share something tender and imperfect about their story. Those are the moments when we lean in, when we feel less alone, when we recognize our shared humanity. Imperfection doesn't push people away, it draws them closer. It gives others permission to exhale, to let down their guard, to be real too. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. The thing we think disqualifies us from love and belonging is often the very thing that makes us relatable and real. The scar, the mistake, the flaw, it's not a wall, it's a doorway. It's a doorway to connection, compassion, and growth. But let's be honest, embracing imperfection is not something you do once and then check off your list. It is a daily practice. It's waking up each morning and reminding yourself that you are enough, not because you are flawless, but because you are human. It's catching yourself when you start to compare your behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel and gently pulling yourself back to the truth that no one has it all together. It's allowing yourself to try something new and risk failing without attaching that failure to your worth. When we embrace imperfection, we stop waiting for the perfect moment to live. We stop holding our breath until we feel flawless enough to be seen. We stop postponing our joy until every detail is neatly lined up. We begin to live right here, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the becoming, in the middle of the not yet. And it is in that place, the imperfect, unfinished, unpolished place, that life is the most real, the most tender, the most alive. So when we talk about rebuilding ourselves, imperfection is not a hurdle to overcome. It is the doorway we walk through. It is the proof that we are in process, that we are still growing, that we are still learning how to be human in a world that tries to convince us otherwise. And maybe, just maybe, the courage to embrace our imperfections is the very thing that will set us free. Vulnerability is a word that makes a lot of us uncomfortable. We're taught from a young age that to be vulnerable is to be weak, to be fragile, to open ourselves up to being hurt. We live in a world that rewards the strong face, the unshakable voice, the polished exterior that says, I've got it all together. But here's the truth we don't talk about enough. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the birthplace of courage, creativity, connection, and real transformation. Without it, we're just performing through life, hiding behind armor that might protect us from pain, but also keeps us from joy. Think about the moments in your own life that mattered most. The ones that changed you. The ones that brought you closer to someone. The ones that made you feel alive. Almost every one of those moments had vulnerability at the center, saying, I love you. First, not knowing if it will be returned. Admitting you made a mistake and risking someone's disappointment. Asking for help when you'd rather pretend you have it under control. Showing up to a new place where you know no one, but daring to introduce yourself anyway. Those moments are scary precisely because they are vulnerable. But they are also the moments that shape us, the ones that expand us, the ones that give our lives meaning. Vulnerability is not about spilling everything to everyone. It's not about laying your whole heart bare on every stage or in every room. Vulnerability is about authenticity. It's about choosing honesty over performance, truth over image, connection over protection. It's looking someone in the eye and saying, "This is who I am, and this is where I'm at," even if your voice shakes, even if your knees wobble, even if you're terrified of how it will be received. The hardest part about vulnerability is the risk it carries, because to be vulnerable means opening yourself to the possibility of rejection, judgment, or failure. And our instinct is to protect ourselves from those things at all costs. We tell ourselves, if I don't speak up, I can't be criticized. If I don't reach out, I can't be rejected. If I don't try, I can't fail. But what we don't realize is that in trying to protect ourselves from pain, we also shut ourselves off from the possibility of joy, of intimacy, of growth, of love. We cannot selectively numb our emotions. If we block out the pain, we also block out the joy. If we refuse to risk disappointment, we also refuse the chance to be truly known and deeply connected. And here's the paradox: vulnerability feels dangerous, but it is also the most reliable path to real safety. Because when we armor ourselves up, when we hide behind masks, when we keep our walls high, we may feel safe on the surface, but inside we are lonely. We are disconnected. We are unseen. True safety doesn't come from building thicker walls. It comes from allowing ourselves to be seen as we are and finding out that even in our imperfection, even in our uncertainty, we are still worthy of love and belonging. In so many ways, vulnerability is the foundation of courage. It's easy to stand tall when you have nothing to lose. It's easy to put on a confident smile when nothing important is on the line. But real courage happens when your heart is at risk, when you share an idea that could be laughed at, when you reveal a part of yourself that could be misunderstood, when you admit you don't have all the answers and trust that you'll figure it out along the way. Courage doesn't exist without vulnerability, because if there's no risk, there's nothing brave about it. I think the reason vulnerability feels so terrifying is because it demands that we let go of control, and most of us spend our lives trying desperately to control outcomes, to control what people think of us, to control how we are perceived. Vulnerability asks us to step into the unknown, to release the illusion of certainty, and to trust that we are strong enough to handle whatever comes. It's a terrifying invitation, but it's also the one that frees us. Because once we stop trying to control every outcome, once we stop trying to script every reaction, we open ourselves up to surprises, to possibilities, to joy that we never could have planned. When we practice vulnerability, we also invite others to do the same. There is something profoundly disarming about someone showing up without their armor. It creates a ripple effect. When one person is brave enough to share their truth, it gives the people around them permission to drop their own masks and show up more honestly too. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And in that space, real connection is born. Relationships deepen, teams strengthen, communities grow closer. Not because everything is perfect, but because people are willing to be real with each other. So yes, vulnerability is scary. It always will be. There's no version of it that doesn't involve risk. But what I know for certain is that without it, life becomes smaller. Our world becomes narrower. Our relationships become shallower, and the stories we live out become less true to who we really are. Vulnerability is not the enemy of strength. It is the essence of it. It is what makes us human, what makes us connected, and what makes us brave enough to rebuild when everything feels broken. Owning your story is one of the most liberating and at the same time one of the most terrifying choices you can make. It sounds simple, even empowering, but when you sit with it deeply, you realize how much weight those words carry. Because owning your story means looking at every chapter, not just the ones you're proud of, not just the ones you want people to see. It means facing the pages you've tried to tear out, the ones that make you uncomfortable, the ones that make you wish the narrative had gone differently. And instead of hiding them, you hold them up and say, "This too is part of me." For so long, many of us live as though our stories are things to be edited, polished, or rewritten to fit the version of ourselves we want the world to believe. We cut out the moments of failure. We gloss over the times we were broken. We hide the mistakes that we think disqualify us. And what we present is a highlight reel, a performance, a half-truth that may earn applause but never allows us to feel truly at home in our own skin. Because deep down, we know what's missing, we know the chapters we've hidden. And the hiding itself becomes heavy. Owning your story is about refusing to carry that weight any longer. It's about standing in the truth of your life and saying, "Yes, I have stumbled. Yes, I have scars. Yes, there are parts of me I wish had gone differently, but I will not live in shame of them anymore." It's about realizing that shame loses its grip the moment it is spoken, that secrecy feeds it, but honesty starves it. When we bring our full story into the light, even the parts that feel messy or unworthy, we discover something powerful. Those very parts are often the ones that make us the most human, the most relatable, the most real. There's a reason why we lean in when someone tells the raw, unpolished truth. We recognize ourselves in it because no one's life is a straight line of perfection, and deep down, we know that. But so often, we trick ourselves into believing we're the only ones carrying hidden pages. Owning your story doesn't just free you, it frees others too. It whispers to them that they are not alone, that their struggles don't make them less worthy, that imperfection is not disqualification but proof of being alive. The hard part is that owning your story requires honesty with yourself first, and that honesty can sting. It means acknowledging the places where you were hurt, but also the places where you hurt others. It means admitting where you fell short, where you compromised, where you let fear drive your choices. That kind of honesty is brutal, but it is also the beginning of healing. Because you can't heal from a story you refuse to acknowledge. You can't rebuild a house while pretending the cracks in the foundation aren't there. Owning your story is also about refusing to let others write it for you. Too often, we let the voices around us define our narrative. Maybe someone told you that you weren't enough and you started carrying that as truth. Maybe someone betrayed you and you started believing you were unlovable. Maybe society, culture, or family tried to box you into an identity that never really belonged to you. But the moment you decide to own your story, you take the pen back. You declare that no one else gets to decide the meaning of your chapters but you. And here's the beautiful part: when you own your story, even the parts that once felt like they would break you, you begin to see them differently. That heartbreak that left you gasping for air, it becomes the chapter where you discovered resilience. That failure that brought you to your knees. It becomes the moment you learned humility, grit, and the courage to rise again. That mistake you thought defined you. It becomes the place where you grew into a better, wiser, kinder version of yourself. Owning your story doesn't change what happened, but it changes the way the story lives inside you. It turns pain into wisdom, shame into compassion, endings into new beginnings. And perhaps most importantly, owning your story allows you to stand in the fullness of who you are without apology. It's no longer about seeking validation from others. It's no longer about trying to curate a perfect image. It's about standing in your own skin, flawed and beautiful, and knowing you are worthy as you are. Because the truth is, the story you've lived, the whole of it, not just the shiny parts, is enough, more than enough. It is sacred, it is powerful, and it is uniquely yours. When we begin to own our stories, something shifts inside us. The weight of pretending lifts. The fear of being exposed shrinks. And what replaces it is a deep sense of freedom. Freedom to show up as ourselves. Freedom to connect with others in a way that is real, not performative. Freedom to move forward, not carrying shame, but carrying the lessons and the strength of every chapter we've lived. And maybe, just maybe, we begin to see that the very pages we once wanted to tear out are the same ones that give our story its depth, its humanity, and its power. Hope as a discipline is something we rarely talk about because most of us think of hope as a feeling. We think of it as something that either shows up or doesn't. Something that flickers and when things are going well and fades out when life turns hard. But the truth is, hope isn't just an emotion that comes and goes. Hope is a practice. It is a choice. It is a discipline we can cultivate even on the days when it feels almost impossible to believe in anything better. There's a misconception that hopeful people are just naturally optimistic, that they're wired to see the silver lining no matter what. But that isn't hope, that's positivity, and they're not the same. Positivity tries to gloss over the pain and say, everything's fine, don't worry about it. Hope, on the other hand, looks straight at the pain, the struggle, the heartbreak, and still dares to say, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe there's something more. Maybe even here, even now, something new can be born. And that's why hope has to be a discipline. Because there will be days when you don't feel it. There will be moments when everything in you wants to give in to despair, when the weight of disappointment feels like too much, when it feels easier to numb out than to keep going. Discipline is what carries you through those moments. It's the quiet, steady voice that says, even if you don't feel hopeful today, you can still choose to act like hope is possible. You can still take the next small step. You can still plant seeds you cannot yet see growing. Hope as a discipline isn't about grand gestures. It's not about declaring that tomorrow will be perfect or that everything will magically fall into place. It's about the small, ordinary acts of faith we repeat day after day. It's about getting out of bed when grief tells you not to. It's about showing up for the people you love even when you feel depleted. It's about applying again after rejection, speaking again after silence, trying again after failure. Hope is less about what we say with our mouths and more about what we choose with our actions. The reason hope has to be practiced is because despair is persuasive. Despair tells us it's safer not to try. Despair tells us the world is too broken, that our voices are too small, that our efforts don't matter. And if we're not careful, despair convinces us to shrink, to stay silent, to stop moving. Hope interrupts that voice. Hope says, yes, the world is broken, but it is not beyond repair. Yes, you are small, but even small lights can change the darkness. Yes, your efforts matter because every act of hope adds up to something bigger than what you can see. But we only learn to hear that voice if we practice. There's a tenderness to hope because it requires us to keep our hearts open in a world that gives us plenty of reasons to close them. And that's why so many people avoid it. It's easier to be cynical, to say nothing will ever change, to expect the worst so you're never disappointed. But cynicism is a kind of armor that protects us in the short term and starves us in the long term. Hope is riskier, but it is also nourishing. It feeds the part of us that wants to believe in tomorrow, that wants to keep creating, that wants to keep loving even when love has hurt us before. And just like any discipline, hope requires repetition. You don't become strong by going to the gym once. You don't build skill by practicing once. And you don't cultivate hope by choosing it once. You build it by showing up again and again, even when you don't feel like it. You build it by surrounding yourself with people who speak hope into you when you forget it yourself. You build it by keeping reminders, words, music, prayers, practices that pull you back when despair gets too loud. You build it by choosing again and again to trust that small steps matter, that tomorrow is still worth investing in, that the story isn't over yet. What makes hope so extraordinary is not that it denies reality, but that it insists on looking for possibility within it. Hope doesn't say the storm isn't real, it says the storm will not last forever. Hope doesn't say the wound doesn't hurt, it says healing is still possible. Hope doesn't say the loss doesn't matter, it says your life still has meaning beyond the loss. It is not blind to reality, it is stubborn in its belief that reality is not the whole story. And maybe that's the discipline most of us need to practice, the discipline of refusing to let despair write the ending. The discipline of holding on long enough to see what comes next. The discipline of trusting that even if today feels unbearable, tomorrow might hold something different, and you don't want to miss it. Hope is not naive. It is not foolish. It is not weakness. Hope is the steady, disciplined act of keeping your heart open, your hands willing, and your spirit alive in a world that will give you every reason to close down.